The valley didn't announce itself. It just lay there under the late spring sky, flat and gray-green and patient, the way old land tends to lie when it has seen too many seasons to bother performing anymore. Rice farms ran out in every direction from the county road, their paddy fields flooded to a shallow mirror, reflecting clouds that couldn't quite decide whether to break open or move on. The tree lines at the far edges were dark smudges. The air smelled of standing water, turned earth, and something faintly mineral, the smell of a place still waking up, not yet certain what kind of morning it meant to have. He was already in it before the sun touched the horizon. That was his way, had been for decades, rising in the dark, pulling on his boots at the foot of the bed, moving through the house without lights, because he knew every step of it the way a man knows his own breathing. The old field jacket hung by the door. He didn't always wear it, but he always passed it. Outside, the world was just shapes and gray gradients and the sound of water sitting still. He walked the edge of his paddy with a flashlight he didn't turn on, boots pressing down into the soft berm between the flooded rows, and he moved slowly. Not because his knees allowed much else, though they didn't, but because slow was how you read something that didn't want to be read fast. 4 acres. Replanted after a first season that had failed. Bad weather, bad luck. The kind of compound misfortune that a man doesn't dwell on if he means to keep going. The new seedlings had gone in 6 weeks back, thin green spears rising from the water in their careful rows, and for a while they had looked like they intended to amount to something. Now he wasn't sure. It was subtle, the kind of thing that would not show up on any report, would not ring any alarm for a younger man walking the same berm with his mind elsewhere. But he had been reading damaged things long enough to know the early language of it. Certain shoots were pale where they should have been deep green. Not yellow, not brown. Just pale, like something was pulling at them from below the waterline, drawing the life downward and away before it ever had a chance to climb. The damage was not on the blade, it was at the root. He was certain of that, though he could not yet say what was doing it. He crouched at the edge of the water, pressed 2 fingers into the mud beneath the surface, slow, feeling the texture of it. Something in the consistency wasn't right. Too smooth in patches, too disturbed in others. A faint slickness that didn't belong to the soil alone. He stayed crouched for a long moment. 3 weeks. That was the number he carried in his chest without having spoken it aloud to anyone. 3 weeks before whatever was happening below the waterline reached a point from which the seedlings would not recover. He stood, wiped his fingers on his denim. He needed to think. He drove out before the dew had burned off the grass. The county poultry sale was held on the far side of the fairgrounds, in a long, open-sided building with a corrugated tin roof that rattled when the wind came through the gaps. He had been there before, years back, when he still had enough capital to make buying feel like a decision rather than a gamble. This Saturday he went mostly because he had no better place to put his hands. The 3 weeks were counting whether he moved or stayed still, and staying still had never agreed with him. The sale was crowded for the hour. Farmers with their hats pushed back, feedlot men in cleaner boots, a few dealers working the edges with clipboards. The smell was hay and ammonia and old wood, familiar the way a worn tool handle is familiar. Not pleasant exactly, but right. He moved through the crowd without announcing himself. found a place near the back wall where he could see the pen without being in anyone's way, and settled into the posture he had always used when he needed to observe without being observed. Weight back, arms loose, eyes quiet. The sail moved fast through the healthy birds. Leghorns went first, then a run of Rhode Island Reds, then laying hens by the crate. The auctioneer had a practiced rhythm, dropping numbers the way a man plays cards. Smooth, a little bored, barely looking up. The crowd did what crowds do, which is mostly wait for permission to want something. Then, near the end, the auctioneer shifted his tone. A change that was not quite a laugh, but was close to one. He said something about saving the best for last, which got a ripple through the crowd. Two of the sale hands carried in a wire pen, low and wide, set on the ground in front of the platform, and inside it were 200 ducks, small, mottled gray-brown, moving strangely, heads low, sweeping side to side in slow arcs like something searching the ground by feel. The man at the back of the room looked at them and did not look away. Most of the ducks had eyes that were cloudy, half-closed. Some turned slightly inward. A congenital thing, the auctioneer explained with the tone of a man setting up a punchline. Defective birds, scheduled for disposal. He was offering them as a courtesy, he said, because some joker in the crowd might have a use for 200 ducks that couldn't find their own shadow. The crowd laughed. It was an easy laugh, the kind that doesn't cost anything. He watched the ducks move, their heads still sweeping, not panicking, not bumping the wire in confusion, moving with something that was almost, not quite, but almost, a pattern, responding to the sounds around them. The laughter, the shuffle of boots, the creak of the pen. The auctioneer opened the bidding as a joke, $30 for the lot. The man at the back of the room raised his hand. The bidding didn't last long. There was one more raise, some kid in the back doing it for a laugh, lifting 2 fingers and grinning at his neighbor. And then the gavel came down at $38. The auctioneer said the number with the flat voice of a man announcing a weather delay. $38 for 200 birds. The room had already moved on, already turning toward the next pen, the real livestock, the animals with futures. He walked to the table, laid the bills down in a careful stack, the way a man counts out what he cannot easily afford to lose, and signed the receipt without ceremony. The loading took time. The auction hands weren't especially careful about it, swinging the crates with the casual roughness of men handling cargo no one valued. He watched them and said nothing, but he positioned himself at the end of the ramp and guided each crate down by hand before they could drop it. The ducks inside shifted and murmured, their heads still working in those low, slow arcs, even in the dark of the slat-sided boxes. Not frantic, adjusting. He noticed that. He noticed it the way a man notices a thing he has already been thinking about. By the time the truck was loaded, 4 crates stacked in the bed, roped flat with baling cord he kept behind the seat, the parking lot had thinned to the men with nowhere better to be on a Saturday morning. That was where the feed store owner found his audience. He was a broad, sun-reddened man who had opinions about most things, and preferred to share them while standing slightly too close to whoever he was addressing. He didn't address the veteran directly. That wasn't how it was done. He spoke to the neighboring farmer beside him, the younger man who ran the larger operation across the creek road. spoke loudly enough that the words had plenty of room to travel across the gravel lot and reach the truck without anyone having to admit they were meant to. Something about good money after bad. Something about a man spending his last dollars on birds that couldn't find a feed pan. The younger farmer added something about the flooded field, how it would be a shame to watch blind ducks drown in a rice paddy, almost as much of a shame as watching a man drown good sense along with them. They laughed. It was the same kind of laugh as inside, easy and low cost. The laugh of men who feel certain enough about the world that other people's wrong turns become entertainment. He tied off the last knot on the bailing cord and checked the tailgate latch twice without looking up. Then he got in the truck. The engine turned over on the second try, rough at idle the way it always was in the morning, and he pulled out of the lot slow and even, the crates settling to a quiet rattle in the bed behind him. The ducks made almost no sound, just the wood and the rope and the road opening up ahead toward the valley. The drive back took 40 minutes on county road that turned to gravel past the second water tower. He kept the truck under 40. The crates in the bed were quiet. A small shifting now and then, the sound of webbed feet adjusting on wood, and he drove with the window down and the radio off, watching the light go gold over the field edges as the afternoon pressed toward evening. He pulled through his own gate at 6:30. He did not rush the release. He unloaded each crate to the bank of the paddy and worked the latches one at a time, setting the lids back without noise. The ducks came out the way uncertain things do, tentative at the edge, heads turning, reading the air. Then the first one stepped into the shallows, and the water took it, and the others followed in a loose drift. Within a few minutes, all 200 were in the paddy, spreading across the shallow surface like a slow, exhaled breath. He watched from the bank until the light failed completely. Then he went inside. By the next morning, word had made it around. The way word does in a valley where people share fence lines and the same feed store and the same 3 miles of road. It travels faster than vehicles, arrives before anyone admits they came to look. By 8 o'clock, there were 2 trucks pulled along the far side of the road above his north field. By 9, there were 4. Men stood at the fence line, some with coffee cups, some without, watching the flooded paddy below. They had expected chaos, blind birds in open water, something between a comedy and a calamity, the kind of scene that gets described at the feed store for years. A man had spent $38 on 200 defective ducks and turned them loose in a rice paddy. The only question was how long before they drowned, scattered, or starved. What they found instead was something that did not have an easy name. The ducks were not panicking. They were not huddled at the bank or swimming in blind circles. They were moving, slowly, in wide, overlapping arcs through the shallow water. The kind of arcs that covered ground the way a man sweeps a room, methodical and edge to edge. Every few seconds, a head dipped, then another, then a third down the line, as though something below the surface was holding their attention in sequence. The men at the fence watched without speaking for a while. Then one said it looked accidental. Another said to give it an hour, they'd scatter. The younger farmer from the east field leaned on the top rail and said nothing out loud, but his jaw moved the way it does when a man is revising something. The veteran was at the gate on the far side of the paddy, one hand resting on the post, watching his birds work the water. He did not look toward the road. He did not acknowledge the trucks. He stood the way a man stands when he is watching something he has been waiting on for a long time, and it is doing exactly what he expected. 10 days passed the way hard waiting always does. Not quickly, not slowly, but in the particular measured way of a man who has learned to track time by small, reliable signs rather than by the feeling of it. He woke before dawn each morning, the same as always. Field jacket off the hook by the door, boots laced in the dark, coffee black and drunk standing up, because sitting took longer and the field needed seeing before the light got full. He walked the bank of the paddy in the gray, early quiet, moving along the edge where the water met the mud, and he crouched every 30 feet or so to look at what the night had left behind. By the fourth morning, he was finding them. Empty shells. Small ones at first, the size of a thumbnail, pink-orange and split, turned up in the shallows where the ducks had worked closest to the bank. He held one in his palm and rubbed his thumb across the broken lip. The ducks had gone down after them in the dark hours, when the snails moved up from the mud. He had guessed they would. The birds navigated by what they could hear and smell, and a golden apple snail moving through shallow water makes a disturbance a man cannot detect but a half-blind duck sweeping low and slow through cold paddy water reads without error. He set the shell down at the water's edge and kept walking. By the 8th day, the shells were everywhere along the near bank. Dozens in a single stretch. Some clustered where the mud was softest. Some rolled up against the rice straw stubble from the previous season. He did not count them. He did not need to. The counting that mattered was happening above the waterline, where the seedlings were doing something they had not done in 2 weeks. They were holding. Not surging ahead, not suddenly green and triumphant, just holding. The pale stress color at the tips of the youngest shoots had stopped spreading. No new stands were going limp at the crown. The root damage that had been climbing silently through the paddy, shoot by shoot, had slowed and then, in the last 2 mornings, seemed to stop altogether. He knew what he was looking at. He had known what it was from the beginning: the mud color at the field edge, the pattern of the failures, the faint mineral smell that came off the water in the late afternoon heat. Golden apple snails. Living in the paddy mud below the waterline, severing young roots before anything above the surface showed a single sign. By the time a man saw dying shoots, the roots were already gone. By the time a man understood what he was losing, he had already lost it. He had known. He had also known that knowing it and saying it to men who had not been looking at the same thing were 2 entirely different problems. So he had said nothing. He had gone to the sale on a Saturday morning in late spring, paid $38, and let 200 half-blind ducks do the talking. They were still talking now, moving the water in their slow, deliberate arcs, and the field was still listening. The AM radio on his windowsill picked it up first. He heard it on a Tuesday morning while he was lacing his boots before dawn. A local farm report out of the county station, the kind read by a man who sounded more like a hardware clerk than a broadcaster. Flat and unhurried. Crop distress reports from the lower valley. Several rice operations reporting early season losses. Seedling collapse across multiple fields. Cause under investigation. Producers advised to contact the county extension office. He finished lacing his boots and went outside. The ducks were already at the far edge of the paddy, working the corner where the water ran shallow against the earthen berm. They moved the way they always moved. No wasted direction, no random scatter. Just that slow, methodical sweep, heads low, bills probing beneath the surface. 200 imperfect birds doing what no one had believed they could do. He stood at the field edge for a long time and listened to the water move around them. By Thursday, the feed store had become its own kind of radio. He went in for a sack of mineral supplement, nothing more. But the place was already crowded with men who had nowhere else to take the weight of what they were watching happen to their fields. He recognized most of them. The younger man from the larger operation to his east was there, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed and a look on his face that had gone past frustration into something quieter and more serious. He was talking about rows. Whole rows, he said, going limp and yellow inside of a week. Started at the south end and moved north like something walking. The feed store owner listened with his elbows on the counter and said he had heard the same from 2 other farms that week. Said the extension man had been out to one of them and hadn't given a clear answer yet. Said it might be water temperature, might be seed stock, might be something in the soil from the wet spring. The younger man said he didn't think it was any of those things. Said it felt deeper than that. No one had named it yet. He paid for his mineral supplement in cash, folded the receipt, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. He did not say anything. He carried the sack to his truck and drove the county road home with the windows down and the warm air coming through and the radio off. That evening the light went long and gold across the paddy, and the ducks were still working, their mottled shapes moving through the reflected color like slow brush strokes. He counted them the way he did most evenings, not obsessively, just carefully, and found all 200 where they were supposed to be. The field looked different now than it had 3 weeks ago. He could see it clearly in the color of the water, in the way the young shoots stood. Something had shifted in the balance of the thing. Across the road, somewhere east, a tractor started up in the failing light and then went quiet again almost immediately, as if the man driving it had changed his mind about where to begin. The next morning, he was out before sunrise, the way he always was. The field jacket hung by the door and the air was cool enough that he considered it, then left it on the hook. The ducks were already moving. He could hear them before he saw them. That low, continuous sound they made when they were working. Not agitated, not scattered, but steady and deliberate. The same sound a good crew makes when a job is going well and no one needs to say so. He was checking the eastern berm when he heard boots on the gravel behind him. He knew the walk without turning. The younger farmer from the operation across the road, the man with the newer equipment and the bigger acreage, and the habit of talking about both without quite seeming to. He came up to the fence and leaned against it with a posture that was trying hard to look like it had nowhere else to be. "Morning," the man said. "Morning." There was a pause. The younger farmer watched the ducks for a moment, and the veteran let him watch. "Your birds seem settled in," the man said. His voice had a lightness to it that cost him something to maintain. "They're working," the veteran said. "Yeah." The younger farmer nodded slowly, as if confirming something he hadn't asked. "I can see that." Another pause. A heron passed low over the tree line to the south, and neither of them remarked on it. "You doing anything different?" the younger farmer said. "With the water, I mean. Or the soil. Your seedlings are—" He paused, searched for a word that wouldn't give too much away. They look good, better than they should, considering the season. The veteran looked out at the field. The young rice stood in its rows with a steadiness that had not been there 2 weeks ago. The water was clearer. The mud held a different quality now, less churned and agitated. He knew what the ducks were doing beneath the surface. He had known it for a while. He gestured at the water. "The birds are working," he said again. The younger farmer waited for the rest of it. There was no rest of it. "Right," the man said after a moment. He adjusted his weight against the fence post. "I just figured maybe you'd changed your inputs, or were trying something different with the water level." The veteran said nothing. He watched a cluster of ducks sweep the shallows along the near bank in the low, arcing movement that he had come to recognize as efficient. They did not rush. They did not need to. They moved the way trained things move when they trust their own senses more than their eyes. The younger farmer pushed back from the fence after a while. "Well," he said, "just checking in, I guess." He turned and walked back toward his truck the way a man walks when he is working something out and hasn't arrived at it yet. Not angry, not ready. The veteran listened to the gravel under his boots until the sound was gone. Then he turned back to the water. The call came on a Wednesday. He heard it on the radio first. The county extension line was asking farmers in the lower valley to report any unusual seedling dieback, patchy yellowing, or soft stem failure in paddy crops. The announcement ran twice between the weather and the farm prices, delivered in the flat, careful tone of someone who already knew the news was bad and was measuring how much of it to release at once. He turned the radio down and stood at the kitchen window with his coffee going cold in his hand. 2 days later, a white truck with county markings pulled up along the road near the Alderman place, which sat 2 parcels north and slightly lower in the water table. Then it moved to the Prewitt operation the following morning. He could see the dust from both visits from his own gate if he stood at the right angle. He did not go to look. He went to his field instead, walked the near bank in the early quiet, watched his ducks work the far shallows in their long, unhurried arcs. The water was clearing in some places, not all, but some. On the 6th day before the 3-week window closed, the white truck came to him. The extension man was younger than he expected, with a clipboard and clean boots that had not spent much time in mud. He introduced himself at the gate, shook hands with a firm grip that was trying to project confidence, and explained that he had been documenting a golden apple snail infestation moving through the shared irrigation channels across the valley. He said the words carefully, the way a man says a thing he has only recently learned to name. The veteran nodded once and opened the gate. They walked the field edge together without speaking much. The extension man stopped at intervals and crouched to look at the water, at the paddy mud along the bank, at the seedlings standing in the shallows. He made marks on his clipboard. He looked at the ducks for a long time, without writing anything. Finally, he said, "Your seedling density is holding." The veteran said yes. The man turned and looked at the ducks again. They were working the midfield shallows in the slow, sweeping motion, heads tilting, moving by sound and scent the way they always moved. The extension man watched them the way a person watches something that does not match any category he was trained to use. He asked how the birds were navigating. The veteran said, "They don't need their eyes for this." The extension man wrote something down. He looked at the field one more time, at the green lines of seedlings standing in rows that should have been failing by now. And then he looked at his clipboard, and then he looked away toward the road. He said he would note the field as an anomaly in his report. The veteran said that was fine. The white truck left the way they all left. The ducks kept working. The extension man's report must have moved faster than he expected, because by Thursday, the feed store was different. Not louder, quieter. That specific kind of quiet that settles over a room when the thing everyone has been saying out loud has suddenly become the thing no one wants to say at all. The veteran had driven in for a bag of trace mineral supplement, nothing else, and he noticed it the moment he pushed through the screen door. Two men standing near the seed display stopped talking, not because they had finished. A third man, leaning against the counter with a coffee cup, looked down at the floor with the careful attention of someone reading something written there. The feed store owner rang up the purchase without the usual commentary. The receipt came off the old machine with its familiar stutter and tear. Outside, the veteran loaded the bag into the bed of the rust-red truck and did not hurry. He had heard enough by then without anyone speaking to him directly. Word moves through a small valley the way water moves. It finds every low place. By Wednesday, the younger neighboring farmer's field had been officially written off. The loss was visible from the county road. The seedling rows had gone the color of old straw. Root systems collapsed from beneath, the damage finally surfacing after weeks of working silently under the water. Two other farms south of the creek reported the same. A man whose family had farmed the same land for 40 years was seen standing at the edge of his paddy at dusk, not moving, just standing. The snails were identified by name now. Golden apple snails. Someone had finally pulled enough mud from a failing seedbed to see them. The clusters of eggs, the adults churning through the root zone, the slow mechanical destruction that had been progressing for weeks beneath water that looked clean. The county extension office was involved. The feed store had information sheets someone had printed and left on the counter near the register. Nobody had a good answer for what to do about it now. The window the veteran had understood from the first week, the 3-week window, before the root damage crossed the line it could not come back from, had closed for most of the valley. The time for an answer had already passed. What remained was the accounting of it. At the diner, at the church parking lot on Sunday, at the fence lines where neighbors stop to talk in the particular way that people talk when they are trying to understand something, without admitting they had been wrong about it. The half-blind ducks came up in those conversations the way uncomfortable truths come up. Sideways, incomplete, followed by silence. A man at the diner was heard to say he knew. Nobody answered him. Nobody disagreed either. The veteran's field stood green in the late spring light, the ducks moving through it in their slow, deliberate arcs, working the water the way they had worked it from the first day. They came on a Tuesday morning, when the light was still thin and the mist had not yet lifted off the low ground. The younger farmer from the operation to the north came first, walking the road that ran along the fence line, his hands in his jacket pockets. The feed store owner came not long after, arriving in his truck and parking on the gravel shoulder without quite pulling up to the gate. A few others followed, men the veteran knew by face, if not always by much else. Men who had been at the auction on that Saturday in late spring, or who had heard what was said there and laughed the way people laugh at things they are certain about. They stood at the fence, The veteran was already out. He had been out since before first light, the way he always was. He stood at the gatepost with one arm resting across the top rail, not leaning heavily, just resting there, the way a man rests who has been standing and working long enough that he knows how to save what he has left. His field lay behind him in the pale morning. The rice stood green, not the tentative green of seedlings fighting for ground, but the settled, assured green of a crop that had taken hold. The water between the rows caught the early light and held it flat and still. The ducks were already working. 200 of them, moving in their slow, unhurried arcs through the paddy water, heads tipping, bills sweeping beneath the surface. They did not rush. They did not wander. They moved the way they had moved from the first day, guided by what they could hear and smell and feel through the water, finding what was there without needing to see it. Their eyes were cloudy and half shut in the morning light, and it did not matter at all. The men at the fence said very little. The younger farmer looked at the field for a long time without speaking. The feed store owner took off his cap and put it back on. Someone else cleared his throat and then did not follow it with words. The veteran did not turn to face them. He watched his ducks. After a while, the younger farmer said something low, something that might have been an acknowledgement or might have been the beginning of a question he did not finish. The veteran gave a small nod, the kind that does not require a response and does not invite one. The valley was quiet around them. A bird called once from the tree line and went silent. The ducks kept working the water, patient, methodical, certain, sweeping through a field that had no right to be standing in a spring when nothing else had made it. The old man watched them and said nothing more. That was enough. That had always been enough.